Gross.
All right. Hello, beautiful people. We are the Brothers Blue. That is Cody.
And that's Kyle. And we're going to continue our conversation about the parties splitting up, the parties changing sides and party splits and things like that. This article that we have to go through this time actually goes over like a lot. It goes over historical shifts as well as kind of what's happening within the GOP right now. Um, the historical stuff is mostly about exactly so like the Whigs, the Know Nothings, the Republicans, and the Democrats, and that kind of 1800s, 1850s, 1860s, kind of like the first half of that century, um, consisting of those four parties going through their different levels of popularity, and then as we know, the Whigs and Know Nothings eventually became nothing. Um, so I'm going to share my screen. Oh, can you enable it?
Yeah. So, just for the audience clarification, this conversation is mostly going to be about one party splitting, not parties shifting platforms or things like that, really. We're mostly going to be talking about how a political party can split.
Can you? It sounds like you covered up your microphone or something.
Oh,
Very muffled.
am I still muffled?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about that. We'll just see.
Why don't you pause real quick? All right. So we were having some technical difficulties around sound, and we got them figured out. I am going to share my screen with you guys so we can talk about this article. I just finished reading it, so I was all the way at the bottom. And then if it's okay with you, what I'm going to just do is I'm going to do some control F
Yeah.
and look at the first thing that I was thinking about. So says there are countless reasons the GOP will almost assuredly remain intact going forward, inertia perhaps chief among them.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with that just because the entrenchment of the two-party system is kind of what that inertia refers to, and it's not going away anytime soon. It refers to this later in the article as well.
Well, and the changes we're going to talk about later in this article, and you said it earlier, I think, in our personal conversation, is that all of these changes take place in the 19th century. These party switches. The last time, like a party was close to like breaking the two party system, was when Theodore Roosevelt created the Progressive Party in 1912.
Right.
Um, so, like, it hasn't been successfully done. Like, although platforms have changed
Right.
completely,
Yep.
the names Republican and Democrat have not gone anywhere.
Right. And that's what I was thinking you would say is the
Yeah.
platforms changing thing because that has happened, but it has been since the Whigs or Know Nothings that we've actually seen an actual party dissolve after having, I guess, national clout. The Progressive
Yeah.
Party coming close when Teddy did that. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. The difference is like the Know Nothings and the Whigs held a lot of local offices like congressional thing and things like that. The progressive movement never really got that sort of ground.
Right. So kind of one of the big narratives of this article is this right here. So there was a GOP civil war. It was short and Trump won. You foreshadowed this to me, and there are other parts in the article that essentially say the same thing, but this is a nice, short, succinct, single sentence about what happened in the GOP over the last 4 years. Go ahead.
And so what's crazy is like people almost want to just like shove it under the rug, the fact that there was a civil war in the Democratic Party between progressives and centrists, and the centrists won.
When are you referring to?
The primaries, basically the 2020 primaries, were the prime example of how of centrism beating out progressivism, period.
Sure. So that's the thing that I'll kind of pivot a little bit is the reason I would rather be in the position of where the Democratic Party is with its internal influx rather than where the GOP is, because like you said, progressivism versus centrism, those are policy and idea platforms. Right now you have Trump against traditional conservatism.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be in a party that has influx over platforms instead of people or personalities.
Well, I would rather be a centrist Democrat than a populist Republican, which is essentially the Joe Biden versus Trump thing, even though Trump's not really a populist, he's a fake populist. Yeah.
The Trump supporting base is the populist base of the Republican Party.
Exactly. And honestly, the populist base of the Republican Party is like what they're talking about in here, like the QAnoners, like the crazy ones. It's like, unfortunately, those are not the conservative Republicans. Those are the populist Republicans.
Correct. Right. And so I guess you could say ultimately that the GOP has the same thing happening internally, where it's populism versus conservatism. But at the same time, that populism is just so clearly represented by Donald Trump. And mentions it in here. Fealty to Donald Trump is tantamount to one's success in like Republican primaries in Georgia and Republican primaries in Tennessee and wherever it happens to be. So I have one thing that I noticed about this article is that there is tons of first person testimony from what seem to be average Joe Republicans who who say something like this. So Brian Walters, a 31-year-old attorney, so a guy our age, said the final thread tying him to the GOP snapped on January 6th. I was sickened by what I saw, he said, and as I considered what was happening, I concluded that continued association with the GOP would constitute aligning myself with traitors. Before I left the office that day, I changed my party affiliation to no party preference. I haven't regretted it for 1 second in the last month. And so this is the main thing that I wanted to say when I saw this. And the reason I highlighted sickened is because this first sentence of this quote really struck me because this is how I felt. I came home that day and I was watching it on the news and I was sickened by what I saw. And even if you had an inkling or an understanding or an idea that this was going to happen on January 6th, like you feel like you had this great intuition or like you had been following maybe 4chan or 8chan threads and you knew something was going to happen on January 6th, even if that was the case, I don't understand how you could sit there and watch that and still not be sickened. Like that was an attack on American democracy. And regardless of how much disdain you may have for the government, in my opinion, that kind of attack on, like I said, on American democracy, it was sickening to me. So
Yeah, and a lot of people would say that you're overreacting, and that's what like kind of pisses me off is like people who take that perspective where it's like, oh, the police just let them in. They were actually trying to overthrow democracy. You're being dramatic. And it's like, what are you talking about? They literally stormed the Capitol and were chanting for the deaths of the vice president and the Speaker of the House. Like,
yeah. So what I'll say to they let them in, could you not see a more evident and obvious example of white privilege? And that's the thing, is like, I would say to people who think white privilege isn't real, how do you look at what happened at the Capitol and not conclude that it was all white people? Did you see an overabundance of people of color represented by insurrectionists? No, it was all white people. And so if the police did let them in, then that's just even further proof of systemic white privilege.
yeah, specifically within the criminal justice system.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So the next thing, you actually mentioned these guys, and it's only mentioned once in here, is this term QAnon. But yeah, so that doesn't mean most Republicans are QAnon adherents or racist or sympathetic to authoritarians willing to overthrow democracy. They're not. The vast majority are decent, hardworking Americans who believe in limited government, strong national defense, lower taxes, and free markets. Okay, so a couple of things, if you don't mind. They're not QAnon adherents or racist or sympathetic to authoritarians. So this is the thing that I mostly agree with. And what I think is overblown right now is like, people are saying that the left thinks every single Republican is this type of Republican. And as a member of the left, I will say that I understand that this is not representative of every Republican. I understand this isn't all of them, but I also understand that this is a large part of them. There is a large coalition within the GOP that are QAnon adherents. Unfortunately, there are racists there. And then there are obviously people who are willing to overthrow democracy, because I think 6 or 7 out of 10 Republicans think that the election should have been overturned. So, I mean, that's overthrowing democracy, and that's supporting that. So I understand that it's not all of them, but it's some of them.
Yeah,
Um,
it literally says it in the next paragraph, loud minority. They have to cater to the loud minority. But
yep,
that, hold on, that also goes for the other side because,
I agree.
no, because of what you just said is, yeah, there are unfortunately some people who think that every Republican is like that. And it's just indicative of the fact that people are uh, participating in these echo chambers where they don't actually get to hear voices from conservatives or like real conservatives, like moderate conservatives.
Right.
Yeah, those people are out there, but the fact of the matter is, yeah, they're not a loud minority, so they don't get heard.
Yes, I like that. I like that. Um, and then before I move on, the only thing I wanted to say is that it says, they're hardworking Americans who believe in limited government, strong national defense, lower taxes, and free markets.
Yeah.
And I just am at any point going to talk about taxes whenever I can, or get an opportunity, because lower taxes is literally what's been happening for the last 50 years. And it's what's created the diminishment of our middle class, as well as wealth inequality as we know it today. That is literally from taxation taking the route that it has over the last 50 years, roughly.
No, and it's exactly the thing that led to the Great Depression. Like literally, like you had some of the lowest tax rates Like tax rates were just slashed in the 1920s because you had three conservative Republican presidents in a row,
Yeah.
and they were just like laissez-faire capitalism.
Well, and it just is insane to me because people don't look at when the times of the most robust middle class, and it's like, oh, what were tax rates like during that time?
Yeah.
It's just so directly related that it's asinine and negligent to not understand or to not acknowledge it for what it is.
Yeah, people's yeah, just absolute lack of understanding of tax policy is incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, and overall, that's the thing about tax policy and how it affects everything else,
Yeah,
from,
we all pay taxes.
yeah, businesses. Yeah. Anyways, the reason I put this down in my notes to bring up fugitive slave law is I don't really want to go into all of this, but something that my mentor and I recently talked about is how the original police forces created in the United States were essentially slave catchers. And I am all for the defunding of police for a couple of reasons because A, why is defunding education not a taboo? Because that's what happens and that's what's been happening for a long time. But defunding the police is just this major, major taboo. It's something we absolutely couldn't do. And defunding the police would be the start. And that's the thing, is it needs to be reformed dramatically because at its base it is an inherently racist institution and it started as a racist institution. So it's hard to get away from your roots, and this is one, in my opinion, that hasn't even really tried. You're on mute, dude.
I have to pause our recording. I'll give me a second.
Okay.
Thank you for putting up with my technical difficulties. You were talking about defund the police and all of the, I don't know, hoopla surrounding it, and that's really what it is like nobody understands that defund the police means reduce the funding of the police. It's not abolish the police. Like there are people who want to do that, and that's a different conversation. But if it comes down to defunding the police, then I'm absolutely on board. Almost, dude, the LAPD and NYPD, and specifically like the larger police stations or police departments in these metro cities are massively overfunded. When these cities have issues like public housing, drug rehabs, all these other things that would actually reduce the need for policing and provide money for the services needed as well.
Yeah, that's actually the boomerang thing that I'm glad you mentioned it because I forgot to. In that, like, when you reallocate the funds that you're wasting on militarizing your police, you don't need a militarized police. So specifically, when you are putting money into things that are helping the community doesn't have such a strong need for law enforcement.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, not to mention, the first cops in America were slave catchers, so it's a racist institution at its core.
Yeah.
So, oh no, I should have written down a different word for this quote because now I can't find it. Oh wait. I'll do this. There we go.
I was like, really?
Calm down. Sometimes I'm a little thick, but it's okay. I like I like how it starts up here. So someone said about Trump after the election, what is the downside for humoring him for this little bit of time? About like humoring him with the election fraud lies. Um, and it says the quote, as asinine as it was, it just that's good stuff. Um, but then yeah, it talks about how the downside was painful or became painfully clear. Things happening in a bad way. This is why I wrote this down. And a party whose brand will remain hopelessly intertwined with the president who tried to overthrow democracy. And so I just, again, when I think about what happened on January 6th and the proceeding events, um, really, really irk me because it's almost anti scientific the way Trump supporters believe in widespread election fraud because the only real proof that we can talk about is like data and data collection and data analysis. And really, that's about as scientific as you can get when it comes to an election. And it's just anti-scientific to believe that there was widespread fraud or that Joe Biden unduly won this election. It's just it's and I want to tread lightly on this one, but it's like religion at this point. Like people have chosen to believe this just the way people believe or people choose to believe whether it's Judaism or Islam or Christianity, that
Yeah.
is
No, I hold
chosen to
on.
have faith. Yeah. Go
With
ahead.
the Trumpism, yes, Trumpism almost has a religion, and like it's not just that. Like people who want to ignore the facts of the election, I honestly get really confused when people like try to say that he's not a racist. And then people come up with like 5 million examples of him being a racist, and it's like, okay, they're literally like cultist religious fanatics at that point.
Right, exactly, because they're choosing to argue against facts, actual facts.
Yeah.
Uh,
And this is kind of different, but like it reminds me of a family member that we have who considers themselves conservative. Like legitimately, she'll be like, "Oh, I'm a conservative, but I still support Donald Trump." It's like, "Okay, I'm sorry. What conservative policy of Donald Trump's do you support?"
sure. So, something I wanted to talk about because I feel like we're getting close to the end, and something I wanted to mention in this video because you and your homie talked about like disillusionment. And something I've thought about is like how a person would have to be so disillusioned to go from being a Bernie supporter and like someone who supports other Democrats, like I don't know, like Tulsi Gabbard or like Andrew Yang, how you go from being a supporter of those type of Democrats to like even a pseudo Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Like you stick up for him here and there, and like you stick up for his constituency. I don't understand, or that's exactly what it is. That type of person must be so disillusioned from the Democratic Party and from what's happened in the 2016 primaries, 2020 primaries, and things
Yeah.
like that.
So when you become disillusioned, it makes it easier for you to make these leaps in logic.
Okay. Yep. So, yeah, that was just something I wanted to mention is how disillusioned one must have to be to go from supporting those types of candidates to being a pseudo Trump uh, apologist, I guess.
Yeah, it literally allows for like that it's not quite cognitive dissonance, but like
Close.
it's going that down that path.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the one thing I wanted to kind of talk about that this article sort of agreed with is that like the GOP did go to Trump. So like at the when the election happened and people realized that Trump lost, some people they were talking about Trump splitting off and starting his own party. But now it's clear that Trumpism has taken over the Republican Party, and it's the conservatives who might have to go off and start their own thing. It's totally switched, and I haven't talked to anybody about this.
Well, and something I think happened is in a short period of time, the Trumpists were like, hey, we'll start a new party. And then they were like, well, that would require a lot. And then they were like, why do that when we can just take over the GOP, use its apparatus, use everything that the GOP has as like resources, and just turn it into the Trump party, which is a process that's been going on for the last 4 years. Something I was interested about that kind of thing in this article was how the next 4 years are going to be this kind of internal fight in the GOP, because the last 4 years have not been that. The last 4 years has kind of been some pushback against Trump, but honestly, the last 4 years, pretty much everyone, and that's the thing, is
Oh,
like
you're right.
Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and all these flip floppers who have now gone back and forth were supportive of Trump over the last 4 years.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's interesting, and what because now this party that doesn't have any of the federal levers of control is going to have kind of this, I guess I don't like saying civil war, because like that's something that happens in nations and is very serious. To say a civil war happens in a political party, I think diminishes the meaning of what a civil war is.
Yeah.
But besides the point, over the next 4 years, it should be interesting to watch what happens.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like the other word for it is called internal struggle, and that just doesn't have the same ring to it.
Right, exactly. Or infighting, it just doesn't sound as, it sounds petty in comparison. Civil war actually carries some weight, but it's not appropriate for this. um, so I hate to make this all about him as well, but this is another quote just about, this is cool, because James Ballinger, a GIS analyst and high school football coach in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You are either for him or against him. He doesn't care about policies or principles, just if you are loyal to him or not. And I liked this because I thought you would like this, because you're a policy guy. Like, let's talk policy. Let's get down to the nitty gritty of what it actually takes to legislate in a way that can affect people's lives. But that's never been Trump's MO. Trump's just a personality, and that's all he cares about is popularity contests. He doesn't care about policies or principles, so
Yeah.
been pretty clear from the outset.
Yeah. Was that your last point?
Yeah.
No, can you control F Seward? There's a quote from I think his there we go. Go down, not that one. You know how to use the arrows. Keep going. Wait, hold on. Hold on, stay there.
Wait, okay.
Go back. Yeah, go, keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
That's the last one, dude. That's the last paragraph of the article.
Okay. Try the word liberal. Well, we won't do this too much. Just try the word liberal. I just don't want to share my screen. You're already doing it, and nope. There we go. That's the one. Okay. So, quote from Senator William H. Seward, who later became, he was a Whig, but he basically was like Lincoln. He was like one of the first Republicans. Like he was there at the beginning, and he literally switched parties from Whig to Republican. And he says that quote there. The Republican organization has laid a new, sound, and liberal platform, and its principles are equal and exact justice. Equal and exact justice. I know somebody who would hate that. It's speech open, decided, and frank. That is the party for us. So I just really like that quote from Seward, and he played a really he was what his Secretary of State, I think. He played a big role in the Lincoln administration and was literally like one of the first Republicans. Yeah.
Yeah, Senator Seward is awesome, and that's what you would glean if you read this article. And I'm glad that you made me find this because, yeah, this quote is great, and it's funny because, like, this literally sounds like everything that and I hate to say this, but like, this sounds to me like the Democratic platform right now. So, like,
It sounds like a quote if you just put the Democrat, like a quote from LBJ, literally, like when the parties switched in the 60s.
and I was gonna say Kennedy.
Ken, yeah, you give too much credit to Kennedy. He was president for 3 years, dude.
Okay. He was transformational.
Absolutely. And he was a liberal Democrat for sure. So, yeah.
Maybe dial that one back a little bit.
Okay.
I have socks with his face on them.
I mean, you know how much I know about Kennedy. That's why I said what I said.
Fair point. Fair point. Actually, yeah. Knowing as much as you do about his assassination alone.
Yeah, just as I mean that. Well, I also that's the thing. I know a little bit about his legislation as well. Actually, I wish I knew more. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Is I do think that he was pretty effective for only a short-lived presidency.
Well, and that's what's crazy is like that'd be nice to say, but the fact is, like his predecessor or his successor,
Yeah.
yes, his successor LBJ was literally like the new FDR. He was like, I'm passing this, I'm passing this, I'm passing this. Like he legislated like a son of a bitch. Yeah.
So I think the thing about Kennedy is he won an election that was so it was him and Nixon, right?
It was really tight. Yeah, very
Yeah,
close to
exactly. So I would argue that it's kind of harder to legislate like an LBJ or like an FDR when you have won a close election like that. So
dude, and LBJ had all the sympathy in the world from both houses.
exactly. And FDR just won by landslides. So
Yeah, seriously, everybody in the country, like to the day he died, everybody loved FDR.
exactly.
Like he just wasn't going to lose an election.
All right. Right. Exactly. What is he? Did he do 4 terms technically?
Technically,
Yeah, 4 terms. All right. So I'm happy with where this has gone, and I'm happy to call it now if you're ready.
yeah, sounds good. Closing line.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Remember, knowledge is power.